Welcome to Avenue's Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insight for local government technology. I'm your host, Corinne Acock, and today we're exploring the world of podcasts for local governments. Now, I know this podcast is dedicated to local governments, but have you ever considered creating your own podcast for your community? Today, we're going to explore just that and learn why podcasts are a must have communication tool to connect with citizens and the steps needed to make it happen. We're thrilled to have with us today Ramiro Adeva, the Assistant City Manager for Agora Hills, California. Ramiro's lively personality led to creating a podcast series for the city, which has been a huge hit. Before he joins us, we wanted to give you a quick example of how his creative podcasts have captured the attention and hearts of the citizens of Agora Hills. And if you're just listening to this podcast today, I highly encourage you to go watch the video version when you get a chance. We'll be right back.
No one told you life was gonna be this way. Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year. But I'll be there for you, 'cause I'm there for you too.
All right, we're bringing Ramiro on now. Welcome, Ramiro. There he is. That was great.
Thanks so much, Corinne.
So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate being here.
Your creativity, I tell you what, it is just so fun to watch your videos. And if you're watching this today, it's just a little, you may want to stay to the very end for any blooper or best of scenes at the very end of this today. So as Assistant City Manager, you have critical info that you've got to pass on to your citizens. And I know there's snail mail and emails, and it's just not effective anymore. So that led to you creating the podcast. Is that correct?
That's right.
Can you tell us, when did you start your podcast series and what benefits have you seen come across from it?
Sure. Thanks, Corinne. And once again, thank you to you for having me on, and hello to the vast Local Government Insights audience. Glad to be here. So we started our podcast in June of 2022. And like you said, we've seen great results. I'd say that some of the benefits, the first and foremost one for me is the fact that we have important information, I think, that's very accessible to the community. And what I mean by that is, we're coming to their front doors at comfortable locations and flexible times that they can actually digest the information, right? And so rather than them having to kind of, rush home from work and go to go see us in person to get the information, they can just follow us. And then when it's convenient to them, they can flip on YouTube or turn on their favorite audio podcast channel and listen to the important information that we're bringing to them, about complex issues like public safety, education. We do things on the local economy and even city services. So I'd say that that's definitely one of the major benefits. The other thing that we've seen with the podcast is it really allows us to engage the community and put them in touch with their leaders at all different levels. So we have local leaders and partners that we've interviewed on the show. We've had our state legislators on the show. We have our federal representatives on the show. And I think that, normally that those might be difficult to kind of have that one-on-one FaceTime or touch. But I think through the podcast, we've brought a platform that allows the community to do that and feel like they're a part of that conversation. And so that's another thing that we've seen as a benefit. And really, I think a huge benefit is just that we are using, it's an efficient use of financial and human resources, where, a lot of times you may be spending time on putting together presentation materials and spending cost on consultants and the number of people on your staff that need to come to a public setting to talk about something. Here, it really is, like I said, it's all put together on one video that can be watched at the convenience of the audience. And so I think it's been a very good use of our financial and human resources. And in government, that's always a good thing.
I tell you what, so I would call this podcast a more standard podcast, like more or a more typical podcast of what one would expect when dialing in. But can you talk about some of the creative intros you've had and the themes and how that came about? I'd love for the audience to know about the themes you've done and just why it has just been near and dear to the citizens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think personal favorites, we've done, one episode a month. And I'd say that my favorite intro personally, I love them all, first of all. Let's get that out
Right.
of the way. But I think my favorite would have to be, we did one throwback to the pop culture icon TV series, The Office, with our city manager, Nathan Hamburger. And that was a fun episode. We really, if you haven't seen it, you've got to watch that one. And then I'd say a close second, we did another interview with our school superintendent. And, in doing the research on him, he had actually been the principal of Beverly Hills High School back in the 90s. And
Okay.
so when we did his intro, we did a throwback to 90210, but instead of Beverly Hills 90210, we were Agoura Hills 91301. So that was a lot of fun. And I'd say just in general, these intros, Corrine, are really about humanizing our guests,
Right.
right? I think that at the end of the day, leaders at all different levels, we're just leaders are all people at the end of the day. And so when we bring our guests onto our show, it's been great for us to be able to be purposeful and intentional on going that good balance of making sure that we're not interfering with the major content of the episode, which is first and foremost. We want to be informative and bring that information to our community.
Mhm.
Starting with a little levity at the beginning kind of helps to lessen any barriers down, and for both the audience and for our guests. And I think it leads to a very successful episode.
Oh, that is great. Now, why do you think it's important for other local governments to consider creating a podcast for their communities?
Yeah, that's a great question, Corrine. I think first and foremost, there are literally millions and millions of people that use podcasts. And so if you're not already using a podcast, I fully believe that there's a missed opportunity there, because there's an audience most likely right there in your community that are part of that millions and millions that I just mentioned, that you're not engaging as best as you might be able to, because you're not using a podcast and it's something that they go to. So I think that that's definitely one thing to think about. And also in government, it's all about easily accessible information, right? And I think that the podcast format does allow for a very easy way for folks, again, to get the access to the important information that they want at the convenience that is that at the most convenient time and location for them. So I think that that's great. And then honestly, we kind of just touched on it right now. I think that podcasts allow you to have an opportunity for a little creativity, right? A little creativity and that humanizing effect. I think
And modern.
and modern,
You've modernized it. Yeah.
exactly right, and modern. And so it's just one of those things. I think as people, we like to laugh. I think it's just a human thing that we do. And so if you can be creative and you can engage in a way that kind of takes somebody, makes someone feel very comfortable, then I think it's going to come across the screen and it's going to be a much better episode.
Those are all very, very true. So, how did you get buy-in from your agency when you first wanted to start a podcast? Because not a lot of local governments have that.
Yeah, so buy-in is huge, right? I mean, that's first and foremost. We don't get anywhere without getting the buy-in. So for us, the buy-in starts with our city council, and it starts with our city manager. At our local level, at the city level, I would say part of getting that buy-in from those leaders is to have something that you can lean on, right? The reasoning as to why a podcast should be considered by your agency. And for us, that started with putting together a strategic communications plan, where we looked at holistically, we looked at the city and asked ourselves, are we utilizing all the best resources and tools to best communicate with our folks here? And so one of the things that came out of that strategic communications plan was a reference to trying to use more video, because video, just I think by the inherent nature of a video. You feel very personal. I feel like I'm looking at you, I'm talking to
Great.
you, So I think that we're smiling to each other. And I think that when you can have that, it comes across the screen. And so I think once we had that, I was able to then ask our city manager if he was okay with it. And then, of course, we were talking to our city council about the benefits that we saw if we utilize this platform. And so getting buy-in from them was absolutely critical. And then I'd say the buy-in process after that is just sort of ongoing as that buy-in comes as with the success of your production. And so I think that every episode we put out, there's more buy-in from our folks here at the city, as well as our audience, which I think has just continuously grown, and that's been a great thing for us. So that's how we got the buy-in, and I think that's how we've kept the buy-in.
So, and I love that your audience has grown, and I know we both share a passion for communication. I know in our prep meetings and stuff, it's like a common theme we've always had about communicating and the best way to get messages out. So for those brave souls out there who want to venture and start their own podcast, what steps would you outline for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I felt like it was only yesterday, even though now I'm thinking June of last year, that we were going through these questions. And so I would say the first one would be to start with being intentional, right? Sit down and actually think about, identifying your key audiences. Who are you creating this podcast for? Who's going to be receiving this information? I would say picking the right team is essential, right? And as you know, there's so many folks. You and I are on the camera right now, but there's so many folks behind the scenes that make this happen, right?
Yes.
We don't just show
Thank
up
you.
and all of a sudden, we have this conversation. There's a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes, and so picking your team is really, really critical, and having the right players involved and having the right expertise involved. Because I feel comfortable talking to you, Kareen, but I can tell you that I wouldn't feel comfortable putting all the technical things together. So we have folks that actually do that. We have both in-house staff, and we have a contract with a reputable communications firm that helps us with that as well. And I just say, get very familiar with your end goal, almost reverse engineer it. Ask yourself, are we doing audio? Are we doing video? Are we doing both? Those are very important questions to ask yourself. And then I would say that would lead into identifying your format. There's obviously many formats that you can do. Right now, I'd say we're doing an interview style format. Podcasts can have solo formats. They can have panel formats. So think about what you want to do and what format is going to work best. I also would say naming your podcast. It sounds simple, but give some thought to it, because there's a branding aspect to it. And so you want to think about what your name is going to be, what that creative cover is going to be, what that thumbnail is going to look like, because branding is a very important thing.
And what is the name of your podcast?
Ours is called The Good Life Agora Hills. And, for us, we actually utilize that in every episode we do. We close every episode with a tagline where I say, hey, keep living the good life. And then our guest says, in Agora Hills. And then we click our beautiful cups. See that, audience? We click these
Very
beautiful
nice.
cups. And so that, you can have fun with that, but naming your podcast and branding is important. Picking a show schedule, I'd say, is very important as well, and sticking to it, right? So if you're coming out monthly, if you're coming out weekly, whatever it is, pick something and then stick to it so that you keep your viewers. I would say then the next step would be distribution and listing it. So where are you going to put this? For videos, we use YouTube, and we use Anchor FM to upload all of our episodes to all the audio platforms. And so understanding how you're going to get the podcast out is big. And then promote, right? You got to be self-promoters, self-advocates. Use every outlet that you can think of in your community to get the message out about this amazing resource. And last but not least, the metrics. Measure success, because we're always growing in this space. And so I think that it's very important you may feel good about it, but the numbers are going to say something, right? So look at your metrics, and then and then adjust accordingly. And I think if you do those steps, that's probably a good blueprint for hopefully what will be a successful podcast.
Great tips, a great outline that you've provided. Thank you so much. So along those outlines, now you've been doing it since June. What tips and tricks have you learned along the way that you would share, or things to avoid, or lessons learned?
Totally right. I got a few for you. The first, and it kind of goes with a little segue from the last one, is I think that, be thoughtful with your guest selections, your questions, and make sure that you're always relating back to your audience or your constituents, right? And the example I would use is at the city level, we're local government, but we've had guests at our state level. We've had guests. I just interviewed somebody last week that is at our congressional level, and so when you're dealing with guests that have a broader reach per se in their responsibilities, it's important to remember why you're interviewing them and how it relates back to your constituents. So there's always got to be something for your primary audience. And so
Right.
there's a lot of careful thought that goes with that, because we could just talk about anything. I could talk about all the state or the federal legislature that's going on, but if it doesn't have a relation to the folks that you're targeting, then I think you're truly going to miss it. So I think being thoughtful is a tip. Do your research. Sounds so basic, but I can tell you that in speaking and watching others, there isn't a lot of research that happens. And when I say that, before every episode that we do, I literally go into an agency's website. I look up bios of the guest. I really try to get into what's hot in their world, and then again, relate it back to our world. And so I think doing your research is important, and that's going to come off screen. I would say, it's obvious again, but give your guests the run of show in advance, if possible, depending on your format. But it really helps because you can have these engaging conversations, and the whole goal at the end of the day is to get information to them. So whatever puts you in the best position to do that clearly and concisely, it helps. And so doing that in advance is great. Speak less, listen more, right? I mean, it's like, as the interviewer, I always, want to throw a question out and then give them the opportunity to answer it. I mean, right. And so I think in normal conversations, some folks have trouble with that, maybe struggle with that. But I found that, again, any of people tuning in are trying to tune in to hear your guest. And so it's important to let them speak. I think it's great team building. So I would say with podcasts, at least in our experience, we've had these creative intros, like I've said. And so we have incorporated staff at the city. People have been having fun while we record these. And so it's a great team building opportunity. So I would say that that's a great tip to kind of throw in there if you have a podcast. Here's a tip learned from experience. Have redundancy on your audio, right? Folks at home have got to hear you. And we've had situations where maybe you might get a dropped signal or whatnot, but we always, our amazing crew has redundancy. So we have a mic that's on my lapel, and we also have a boom mic above me. And so it does allow for us to make sure that we're not going to get back to the table.
That is very clever.
Right?
Yeah.
We're going to realize we don't have the audio. And then have a competent team of communication professionals, like I mentioned earlier. And then two last things. I just say, humanize your guests. Take it as an opportunity to really bond with them. Kareen, in the short time I've known you, I think we've had amazing conversations, and I really enjoy engaging with you. And it's just easy to be here with you.
Oh,
And-
I want to be a mouse on your creative team. So.
Right? Hey, you got it. And then the last thing is just be creative and be fun. Again, I think at the heart of everything, who doesn't like to have fun, right? And so if you can figure out that balance, because there is a careful one, and I think in the world that you're in and that we're in government, a lot of times there's a stereotype about what government is and what it isn't. And, I think rarely do you hear the word fun maybe thrown in when you hear the word government. And so it's like push back on that though, and try to be creative about, no, how can we make government fun? Because
And modern. That's
right?
2 words that you're breaking through. Yep.
That's right. And so anyhow, I would just say be creative and be fun. That's how I would say it.
Well, you certainly are doing both of those things.
Thanks, Kareen.
So you mentioned promotion earlier. So if somebody's going through these steps and they've got the basics outlines and they're starting the podcast, what steps did you take to promote your podcast in Gora Hills?
Yeah, so Kareen, I think there's the easy ones, which are, use any of the social media platforms that you have, right? So at the city, and I'm sure every agency has these by now, we've got the Facebook, the Instagram, the Twitter, the Nextdoor. So I think using those resources is right there. So you want to use the easy ones. I think that there's also, if you have a local paper or something where, publications that are well known within your area, use those as well. They're partners, right? And they're going to highlight things that are important. So we, whether it's putting out a press release to talk about the the new podcast you're about to launch, or it's having, doing a feature piece in your local paper on an episode or a guest that you're going to have. Like, utilize each other to really, those are local resources that you should be able to easily use. Media pitching was really big for us. Again, this came with our team. We record these episodes and then they do a fabulous job. I go back and have my tea, and then they go and do the hard work behind the scenes where they pitch it. So they'll go out and, our podcast has been, we had a featured article recently from the League of California Cities. We've been in American City and County, California City Management, Public CEO. We were on another podcast to talk about this podcast, and we're so honored and grateful to be on your podcast.
The honor is ours. Yeah.
It's an honor. And I mean, things like this really help. So we appreciate you, Corrine, and the whole team over at Local Government Insights for giving us an opportunity, because these kinds of things really help to promote as well. So I'd say, thank you to everybody that's promoted us so far, and then utilize your easy resources to keep promoting.
Yeah, no, we were truly, truly excited to have you on the show today, and to have this topic in general. So it's really important. I think it's really great and just brilliant, for a way for local governments to branch out and communicate to their citizens.
Awesome.
So let's talk about metrics. So what type of metrics do you keep, and how do you measure success? Like, what is success to you?
Sure, no, that's a great question. That's important. And I'd say that our metrics are twofold. We have quantitative and qualitative, right? So on the quantitative side, I would say that the numbers, just the sheer numbers, right? So we used to have, I'd say, we would set up a workshop, and we would spend all these resources kind of putting something together. And there are still avenues that makes sense. But what we were seeing is, for certain workshops, we had complex topics, and we would get a handful of community members actually showing up. And our latest episode now, we went from a handful, literally numbers that can probably fit on my hand, to the latest episode that's out there right now is nearing 700 views, right? And so
Nice.
For us in government, that's a big deal, right? Because those views and are then hopefully watching and telling other people, hey, you should check out this information. And then that kind of sort of, maybe might make its way in numbers that aren't actually coming up initially, but those numbers, from the views is really helpful. We also have seen, we can measure your average listening time. And so we're upwards of about, I think, 60-70% of an episode in average listening time, which is pretty good. I also think, it's like you can do number of 5-star ratings or the number of likes and subscriptions. So those kinds of things are metrics that, on the quantitative side, we measure success. But then there's another component to that, which I think is the qualitative measures of success. And for us, those are like the comments and the feedback that we're getting. We have kind of compiled an archive of positive reviews and feedback that we've gotten. And it's great to kind of take a look at those and really gauge how well you're doing by what people are saying.
Yeah.
Right. And so we measure it that way as well. So again, not so much, there's not a number per se to that, but there's a qualitative aspect to let you know whether or not you're doing something that is making a difference. So that's how I think our metrics work.
Well, so we've talked about the fun part, right? We've talked about, and all the benefits and the citizens really enjoying. But can you talk about the actual topics that you're covering during it? So we haven't talked about that. So I want to make sure our audience members can know what type of topics they can convey to their citizens through a podcast.
Absolutely. I'd say that it's an open book. I mean, you can really cover any topic. And the ones that we've particularly covered are, public safety, right? That's always going to be that's always big for the community, any community. And so, we've talked with, whether it be our city manager or the captain of our sheriff's station. And we're actually going to have the sheriff of Los Angeles County coming on a future podcast episode. So public safety. But we've talked about, many folks across the country, they, I don't know what the housing situation is in other states, but in California, it's dire. And so that was actually our very first episode. The genesis of our podcast started with an episode on housing and the housing crunch and what we as an agency are doing to kind of help that situation out. But I mean, if your community has a homeless issue, if your community, if there's economics that are just not penciling out, if there is, a major situation that's about to come up that, should be talked about. If there's a big public works project, if there's any, an evacuation or a natural disaster of some sort, all of these things are perfect for a podcast format, I would say. And so we're covering topics like that. And we're really, again, in the spirit of being thoughtful. When we think about what's important to our community, that's what our topics are really rooted in. So education, right? That's a huge one for our community. We have an amazing school district, but not sure that a lot of folks might not be able to kind of, we want them to hear from the superintendent. And so we come up with topics that really kind of give that picture from the people that run that show. And so those are the topics that we cover, topics that are most important to our community.
So all fun put aside, you're really delivering the message, and that's what really matters.
Yes, exactly, Corinne.
So what's next on the horizon for Agora Hills?
I'd say keep going. I think that, we've had a taste of success. And I think with anything, when you're successful in something, you want to keep improving and then see if the platform can continue to level up. Communications for us, and I think for everyone across the board, and you and I were just talking about how important communications is. It cannot be understated in terms of the importance of effective communications. And so for us, we're always looking for that way to level up. Our podcast is a great way to do that, but it's a certain format. One thing that the city is looking forward to do in sort of that next time is we're going to start a little mini series called In the Know. And it's going to be kind of these where our podcasts run maybe 25 to 30 minutes, but the In the Know ones are kind of like we want to be a creative take where we use condensed videos to really kind of take the place of I'd say boring FAQs, right? So it's like, instead of handing the community something to read, we want to be able to kind of do that in an engaging way in a short time frame on important topics that need to come out with more frequency. And so again, as a team, thankful again once to our city council and our city manager for allowing us the opportunity to take this next step in leveling up our communications. And so we're excited to bring that out. But I'd say that that's next on the horizon for us, and we're really excited.
I love it. We're going to have to bring you back for In the Know.
Deal.
So, well, Ramiro, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that wraps us up for today. And thank you for sharing your expertise and your passion. Invite everyone to please go check out The Good Life in Agora Hills. And as promised, we have a special treat at the very end of this podcast that we're going to be sharing some of The Good Life of Agora Hills, the best moments from that podcast series. So as we pull that up, I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us for another episode of Local Government Insights, Modernizing Government Leadership. We look forward to having you join us next time. Thank you, everyone.
All right, let me see if I can turn this off. That was a great episode. Whew. So, hey, it was awesome. No, it was great. I just got off the Local Government Insights podcast. It was awesome. Yeah, very professional, extremely professional. Totally.
Did we get you guys? That's just how to show you the plug.
Take care, everybody. AgoraHillsPodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Dave Peterson of Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. I'm joining you here from beautiful Agora Hills, and I thought I'd kick us off by showing you a few water-saving tips. So as we get started, here's what not to do.
Let's go tonight. Share the spice of life. And it's like tonight. We gonna groove tonight. Let's go.
Oh, hey, Gore Hills. Nathan Hamburger, City Manager. Oh, what am I doing? I'm putting some labels on. I really like to keep things organized around here. It really helps us be efficient. Perfect.